We're going to talk about a little bit about DIY distribution, but more about creative distribution, sort of like doing something a little bit more outside the box. And we have a really great sort of case study with the film Unrest, and their partnership with the Creative Distribution Initiative at Sundance. Something like that. I'll actually let you guys introduce yourselves. Do you want to start with Lindsey over there?
Yeah, sure. I'm Lindsey Dryden. I'm a director and a producer, and I'm one of the producers of Unrest.
Alysa Nahmias, also a director and producer of Unrest with Lindsey, and Trish Gillespie and Jennifer Brea, who also directed the film.
And I'm Chris Horton. I'm the director of the Creative Distribution Initiative at Sundance Institute.
So just so that we can get everyone up to speed, do you guys want to say a little bit about just what the film is about, so everyone's on the same page, and then we're going to show a clip in a few minutes as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the trailer's pretty self-explanatory, but essentially it's a film by director and film subject Jennifer Brea, who found herself with a mysterious illness that her doctors wouldn't believe in, and set out to find out what was going on and prove them wrong.
So do you guys want to sort of talk about the backstory a little bit, in terms of thinking about community and the audience that Jen had built and how it sort of moved forward into your relationship with Sundance?
Yeah, sure. So Jen started making the film at the end of 2013. She'd never made a film before. She was an academic before embarking on this adventure, and she set out to raise some money on Kickstarter. She set out to raise $50,000 and actually raised over $212,000 and realized, okay, there's a serious audience here for this. And that was really when Jen started doing possibly the most important thing about this film. She started engaging with her audience from very early on, and she's continued to engage with them very deeply and expand that audience since then. And so Jen started filming from her bed, and there were producers like me and Trish and our co-producer in Denmark, Anna, filming on location and enabling our crews to work with Jen's direction. We used a lot of technology. We used Skype, we used teleprompters, so that she could be in the room as a director, even though she was at home in her bed for the majority of the shooting. And I mentioned the audience because we obviously started thinking about distribution early, and that's what we're here to talk about. And this audience is very specific. It's very active online. It's very communicative, and also we had some very specific impact goals with the film. We wanted to achieve something with this film, as well as make a film and release it and see what happened and reach an audience. So we started thinking about our distribution strategy while we were in production.
I can add to that, when I came on the film, which was in the early, maybe mid stages of post-production, and it was one of the things that attracted me was how remarkably connected and how much vision Jen and Lindsey and Trish had, not only for the film itself, and the team that they had built, but also for the way that it would reach the world. And it was always clear that this would be like a multi-pronged approach, and that it would try to function at the highest level in all the different distribution platforms and methods, and really try to achieve the most direct connection with audiences, to maintain the personal voice that's both in the film and with Jen as a director and a member of the community that she's making the film about. So I've had done some self-distribution and creative distribution actually with Chris in the past on one of my previous films, Unfinished Spaces, and when the film got into Sundance, I think we were really interested in exploring all kinds of different avenues, and opened up discussions with Chris and the Creative Distribution Initiative, as well as obviously with our agents and publicists and everyone else involved. I don't know how, we don't want to move too fast, but that's sort of where things started, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe, Chris, do you want to talk a little bit more about what the initiative is, so we can get a sense of that landscape?
Sure. It might be helpful for us first to get maybe a show of hands. Who among the audience identifies most as a filmmaker? Okay, great. Yeah. And who is a producer, but maybe not a filmmaker per se?
Director. All producers are filmmakers too.
Yeah. Okay, well there you go.
So raise your hand if you're a director.
Yeah.
And then if you're a producer, raise them high. Loud and proud. Thank
Which
you.
way's the exit? Yeah. So, yeah, well, that's helpful. And to give you guys a little sense of where we come in, the program I run used to be called Artist Services. It's currently called the Creative Distribution Initiative. And we really try to serve as a resource to Sundance alumni, Sundance-supported filmmakers to power creative models of distribution, especially because, you guys are not going to believe this, but not every film that premieres at Sundance or gets support from a Sundance lab does a global $5 million deal where everybody's happy. Most films have to scrape by, and if you think about all of the films that apply to get into Sundance, a lot of them don't get in. And even the ones that do get into Sundance don't have distribution outcomes that are net positive for the investors. So our objective is really to try to create resources and strategize with film teams to power more dynamic ways of reaching audiences that ideally, in success, just based on the economics of what self-release entails, more of the money can go back to the film teams rather than fee after fee after fee of middlemen along the way. And we've been doing this for about 6 years, where we created a very easy, filmmaker-friendly pass-through way for any Sundance film to reach digital platforms. Back in the 2010 festival, which was the festival that preceded the creation of Artist Services, about 40% of films that premiered at the Sundance Film Festival didn't get distribution. And so it was meaningful for us to say, hey, we've got you a guaranteed Netflix deal, we've got you a pass-through way to get onto iTunes, but currently about 90% of films that premiere at Sundance get some form of US distribution. It doesn't necessarily mean it's an A+ deal, but what we wanted to do was try to create a lab of sorts. And what we did was launch basically what's Sundance's first ever marketing and distribution lab, which is called the Creative Distribution Fellowship. And we put this together over the last year and kind of kept it a little bit under wraps and selected 2 films to support in its pilot program, one doc, Unrest, and one narrative feature, Columbus. And the thinking was, we're not out there to compete with a traditional all rights deal, but rather to be a very engaged presence for filmmakers choosing to self-release in a way that can really try to accomplish all of the goals that they set out to do. And ideally, if the film's successful, all of that money flows back. And so Columbus was released this summer, and Unrest was released earlier this fall and has a very ongoing distribution program. What we did was we gave both films grants and helped the film teams basically take that money and choose how to spend it, just like a traditional distributor would do, and then help them set them up with deals for digital distribution and make connections to basically see if this can work. And what we're doing for the field is creating and producing very high-level case studies that will be available in March, that we can really show sort of, hey, how did this work? What did we learn? And ideally try to create some engagement within the broader film community to really try to change the way that filmmakers are connected to their movies.
And I think it's worth saying, going DIY with distribution is kind of not what you do. It isn't about doing it yourself. It's about having the freedom and the opportunity to bring together the people that you want to do it with you. Our team is huge. We have a team in the US, in the UK, in Australia, and it was really, I think it's really important to think of creative distribution or hybrid distribution or bespoke distribution, because there's so many different names floating around, as a choice. It's not about not having other options and therefore doing it on your own. It's about figuring out what's the best way to engage with our audience, what's the best way to serve our audience. Because, distributors with all rights deals are great things for a great many films, and for some films they're not the right fit. There are lots of good distributors who might offer you an all rights deal and they might be really good at theatrical and not interested in educational or not interested in community screenings. And we wanted to, from early on, we broke down our distribution strategy into all the different platforms we wanted to reach, all the different reasons we wanted to do that, all the different ways we wanted to engage with our core community, then the next level of the community in addition to that, so people affected by similar issues, and then the wider public, who ultimately are the people who need to see a film like this, because it's about advocating for change by people who have the health and the ability and the social power to do that. So we really went into this process choosing creative distribution rather than it being sort of what you end up doing because you don't get any better offers.
Yeah, I think one thing that's important too is that you want to go into it with a real desire to do it, and to think of it as much like when you do a Kickstarter campaign. It's a creative act. You're creating something, and you're working on it for a couple of months at least. And I think with this, it was going into it knowing that this is a creative project for our team, and we're going to design it, and we're going to think outside the box, and like Lindsey said, assemble an incredible team to make it happen, and be very adaptable, and take interest in doing that for several months, because
many months.
Yeah. So again, that's also not for everyone. I've worked on projects where the director, unlike Jen, doesn't want to be on the road engaging with audiences for very long, and that's okay too. So you want to think about what the right match is.
Can you guys talk about let's get into the nitty-gritty of like what your objectives were for your creative distribution, and maybe tie that a little bit to the narrative of the film too, because it's not this kind of what you guys have done is not for every single movie. It's not perfect match. So maybe also talk about some of the resources and like special things about the narrative that made this distribution process make sense for you guys.
That's a good question. Do you want to start?
Yeah, I can start. So, broadly, in terms of our aims, we wanted to reach the widest possible audience. We wanted to make some money, or at least, recoup money. And I think it's great to think about creative distribution and that you don't have to choose between those two things. There may be instances, within your distribution plan where you prioritize one or the other, but overall, you don't have to make the false choice of, do I want to make money or do I want to reach people? I think that we wanted to marry those two together, and we also wanted to make impact. So we wanted this film to have, measurable outcomes in terms of the topic of the film, which is this disease that doesn't receive enough research funding for where patients are feeling isolated and misunderstood, and we wanted to give them hope and give them some tangible results and outcomes that they could feel like we're shifting the needle on where things are at. And then we also wanted to make sure that Jen is out there as an artist, as a director, and have this film be understood for the cinematic work of art that it is. So that was important to us in terms of the publicity and the framing of the film as a work of art and as a contender in terms of this year's documentaries. And so I think we've been successful in all of those ways so far, and it continues. Do you want to break down a little?
Yeah, so in terms of the story, as we mentioned, as you saw in the trailer, it's about a woman who ends up with an illness that's utterly debilitating and that there doesn't seem to be a treatment for, and that the majority of her doctors don't take seriously. So those are specific things that we wanted to address. In the US, the UK, Denmark, and Australia, they're kind of our core territories. And so a lot of the distribution was geared towards addressing those topics and those stories, those parts of the story in those specific places. And so the way that it's kind of breaking down is festival release, followed by theatrical releases in those countries, followed by digital release and DVD, and then television. And included in all of that is a really important phase of community and educational screenings. And it's nuts how much is happening right now. There's so many screenings happening. Like just this morning, part of our UK team sent me a tile that lists the 20 community screenings that we have happening in the UK this week, which is actually quite a lot for a small country.
And we have a big one tonight in LA with the IDA, and so there's just all happening.
Yeah. And community screenings was the last thing. You just started doing community screenings after? No, because you're doing TV next. So were you doing community screenings throughout, or when did that begin?
It began straight after theatrical.
No, before a little bit. So the planning, the window. I guess
it spreads a long time. That part.
One of the things that we've learned in through this film and in the fellowship is the importance of windowing, right? So we call it. Chris is a big advocate for as soon as we started the fellowship was basically like, this is one of your first assignments, so to speak, was to get the windowing really clear, which means what comes first, second, and third. What are your start dates? And so grassroots community community screenings, we brought on a consultant, Film Sprout, Caitlin Boyle, who's incredible, and I had worked with in the past, and Chris has worked with in the past, and Lindsey's known for a while. And what they do is specialize in grassroots, like, hosted screenings, at universities, at museums, at community groups, and they have a broad, network through that, and they also build a network for each film. So they started work on that this summer. So our festival premiere was in January. We brought them on late spring, early summer, and they started planning as we were planning for our theatrical and the TVOD or transactional VOD release that was going to happen in the fall. So they started reaching out, saying this film is going to be available for community screenings, planting the seeds and cultivating the relationships. That then the screenings themselves began, I believe, in August or September were the first community screenings that happened publicly, and then
In the US.
In the US, yeah. So you had
And it's
waited
been
longer in the
slightly
UK.
different. Yeah, it's been slightly different in the UK. We've been working with an organisation called Together Films who work on impact and distribution, and we also have an impact producer and an impact strategist who's worked with us for a long time about deploying all of this and how our different audiences work and how our different kind of core targets work. And so with the UK, we started that process just before theatrical was when we started planning, which was in October. And those community screenings happened immediately after theatrical in the UK. Yeah.
I'm wondering how, I don't know how experienced our audience is, but I'm wondering if some people might be thinking, okay, you guys are doing all this cool stuff, and that seems really far away from what I'm doing in terms of getting theatrical and all that stuff. So I hope I'm right, but maybe we could back up for just like a minute and a half and just say quickly how you meet these people. How do you get theatrical? How does that SVOD stuff, become a reality?
I will say very quickly that it's completely surreal to finally be in the phase of actually doing this, as opposed to being in the phase of planning it and talking about it and pitching it and telling people you're going to do it for such a long time. So I'm still like, oh, it's happening. It's a real thing. But in terms of your actual question, I will let...
Well, so we,
Tired personal ideas from the journey.
It really is amazing. And I remember like walking in the snow with you and being like, it's going to happen. It's
finally going to happen.
Believe it. And I've been on films where you have that moment and films where you don't have that moment, where you're like, oh shit, nothing's happening. And what are we going to do? So, but with this film, you meet people by being out there and asking for what you want and trying to rely on resources and relationships that you do have and being pretty clear about what's realistic given your budget and your access, right? And your film and what you want for it and what you really believe it can sustain. So for example, with our, we did have agents. When you get into a top festival, you can have sales agents and they will introduce you to PBS who might want to acquire the film,
How long did you have the sales agent before you went to Sundance?
We were in conversations for months before. Lindsey and Jen had talked to people at the pitching forums, and I think you finally sign on, pretty close to when the festival is going to happen.
Yeah, and there is that phase for all of them of like, they're all waiting to see what might happen, who might get in, and how that affects the decisions that they want to make. So towards the end of last year, there was just constant conversations with our partners, with the potential agents, figuring out who was a good fit for us, who thought they were a good fit, who thought we were a good fit for them. And it all sort of hangs in the air until the Sundance announcements are out. Everybody makes their decisions, everybody stacks up their kind of dance cards, and then you move forward.
I think the million-dollar question people often have, I'm sorry to go on this tangent, but I think it's important. Like, did you show your sales agents anything before you got into Sundance, basically?
Yeah, I mean, the film we'd been really out there from the very beginning of the project. Jen wasn't a filmmaker before she made this, but she was a director with tremendous vision, and we went to, one of our first supporters was the Sundance Institute, who gave us some development money very early on. And so we'd been to the workshops and the labs, and we'd been through so many programs and fellowships, and we're really, really lucky to do that, because that's another way that you obviously expand your network and have people know about the film. So people had already seen trailers, people had already seen bits and pieces during that development and production journey, because we were fundraising throughout that process. And so they had seen stuff, yeah, for sure.
So just go really fast. So you get to Sundance, you have a sales agent.
So that's one way of
Snow's
learning
really
your
nice.
People are
partners.
staying up all night,
Yeah.
bidding wars, and then what happens after that?
Then you go in the hot tub. No, I'm just
Windowing.
kidding.
Go in the hot tub every morning because it's the only thing
was
that
no
will
hot
keep you healthy and sane.
Yeah, so then
You have to find one that belongs to someone with money who doesn't make documentaries.
the fellowship appeared
Sorry.
for us, and that is, like Chris said, not, there were 2 films chosen to do that this year, so that's not for everyone, but I think to put it in a framework of what you can do within or outside of the fellowship, I think some of the first introductions that were made were to a theatrical booking agent. So we wanted to think about what was possible for this film theatrically in the U.S. and then Lindsey also interviewed people in the U.K. and started a dialogue with Picture House Cinemas in the U.K. And I think that you pretty much, stalked them in a good way, right? And you have to be persistent, and you
Yeah.
have to convince people that your film is, that you have an audience, that it's worthy of being out there. And I think that, the theaters want to know that they can sell tickets. And so showing them that you have a built-in audience, that's where, again, that Kickstarter campaign and our mailing list and all that stuff that Jen and Lindsey and Trish built early on came in handy, where you can say, we have X thousand people who already want to see this film.
Yeah, that was
Who already
completely
supported
essential.
it. Yeah.
I think with especially with theatrical bookers, one of the things that's been so extraordinary about working with the Sundance Distribution Fellowship is that there are people who wouldn't talk with us, because we're not traditional distributors, unless we had that relationship with them through you, and unless there were those introductions that happened. And so lots of things we were able to make happen independently because we have relationships, because we've been talking to people for many years and thinking about how our film will fit with their model, and harassing them slightly, because you have to. That's part of this process, whether you're in production or you're planning distribution.
You have to cut through the noise.
Yeah.
It's a little light stalking is fine, I think.
Gentle stalking.
Chris, you want to talk about why Unrest was a good fit for what you guys were doing, and what were your objectives, and how did you guys execute that?
Sure. So I think a lot of what they talked about was really a great fit for what we were trying to do. And I think one of the things that hasn't been said yet today is that nobody better than Jen can articulate what this film is about. And because it's so sensitive and because it's so personal, there was a very conscious choice, that, hey, it's going to be very tough for us to give the film to an all-rights distributor who will control all of the social media marketing, who will talk about the film, cut the film in ways that may be antithetical to the audience that we're trying to reach. Because early on with the film, back when it was called Canary in a Coal Mine, and they had done the Kickstarter, Jen really became sort of one of the public figureheads for ME, and developed a profound connection with her audience, and built up that audience in a very personal and direct way on Facebook. And it's very difficult to suddenly say, okay, distributor A, you're offering us 40% of our production budget, go take the rights and do what you want, and then there's the risk of the disease being slandered, or the articulation, it not being properly articulated. And so for us, and again, we were very covert with this fellowship. And by the way, we are open for year 2 for any film that's premiered at a U.S. festival. We're going to be picking 4 films to be released in 2018. So you can ask me in the Q&A or come find me afterwards. But, they really presented, I think, a very clear set of objectives and goals that they wanted to reach. And for us, we're all about not necessarily controlling the process. We're about trying to amplify things that, if we had these resources, here's what we wanted to accomplish. And so, of course, for us at Sundance, having been involved with the film not only at our festival, but supported through the doc film program prior to that, this became a really great test for us to say, hey, can our resources help the team accomplish both their distribution, financial, and impact objectives? And then down the road, can we use this as a case study to really be an educational model for the doc community to follow? Because in this day and age, who knows, the 28, don't tweet this please, but the 2020 Film Festival could be the Netflix Film Festival or the Amazon Film Festival. And, the way that the Unrest team took control of all of those rights, empowered the process, controlled it all, organized it all, I think offers a very compelling way to not only reach audiences in those community screenings across the world, but to get those revenue streams directly back into the film, which in the case of success is really, really something profound, we think.
This is really pragmatic, but one of the resources that we initially were able to access through the fellowship, but is available to anybody, is called Quiver. Quiver Digital. It's a division of Premiere Digital, and through Quiver you can pay a fee to get your film onto iTunes and other digital platforms for transactional VOD, and that's not curated. That's just you can do it if you follow the instructions, and so that's a really good resource to know about, both for films that are doing a hybrid kind of, like well-fueled release, and then others that are smaller and just you want to get it out there and do your self-distribution and have it accessible.
Yeah, and that's a partner of ours at Sundance, and they're basically an aggregator / encoding house. So they'll take any feature film and then pitch it to iTunes. You pay them a modest upfront fee, but then you get 100% of what comes back. And back to my earlier point about fee after fee after fee, if you use an example of, let's say, iTunes takes 30% and 70% comes back to the distributor. In this case, the film team gets 100% of that 70%. But in a traditional distribution model, the distributor will take 30% off the top of that 70% before anything happens. And then they'll recoup all of their costs. And then they'll recoup whatever they spent to acquire the film and interest and overhead and blah, 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 blah. And then
Which in my experience usually equals zero.
Yeah,
in experience on other films.
Yeah, and you should never ever rely on making any money at the back end of a film. If it happens, that's a glorious thing, but it's not that common. And so many people build in deferrals for themselves, and they rely on that being the thing that eventually helps you recoup all the time and the energy that you've essentially donated to your project. And most people are likely to be disappointed.
So let's talk about that stuff. Like, let's, as comfortable as you guys feel about talking about numbers or whatever, I think it'd be good to talk about, just like break down a little, like you're saying, the percentages, and just how that works in each step. Because I feel like, I like to try to dig in as much as possible. So maybe, like, could you go through maybe each window and just say whatever you want to say about how that deal was sort of broken down?
So with community screenings with firms like Film Sprout, you're going to pay a retainer for their services, and then you'll get 100% of the screening fees, whatever they are. So you are essentially calculating the risk reward of paying up front for the services to try to recoup or make money on the screenings that they book. They're like a booking agent in a certain way. And then same thing with the many theatrical booking services. You will also pay a service fee, a retainer, and then you will keep the cut of the box office, which can be a range, but seems to. Chris could probably speak to what that hovers around.
For an indie film, the theaters typically take about 65% of the box office. So about 35% for an indie will come back. It's obviously much greater than that for, if you're The Last Jedi, but
another alternative is, and we did this in certain instances, one of the advantages of running our own theatrical was that we could decide in certain cases to four-wall a theater, where we say we'd rather pay X amount of dollars up front and get 100% of the box office. So the theater is guaranteed that upfront fee, it's a rental, and then we are guaranteed 100% of the sales.
And then the other thing that you can do, and it's more straightforward, I think, in the UK because it's a smaller territory and, there's just less ground to cover. But we were able to negotiate better box office for us because with every screening that we do, we bring a lot of value. We have our own marketing to our community and beyond. We have our own social media team. We make sure that there are guests from the ME community across the country at all of our screenings. And so actually we can offer quite a lot to the cinemas to get people into their spaces, and that really helped us.
Yeah, one of the things that appealed to us about the proposal that the Unrest team laid out is that they had a very specific and methodical idea about how to tap into some of these various audiences that are maximized by specific windows. And, you know, obviously they had a vision for what they wanted this film to do in a maximum case of success, and they had goals, but, you know, they were also sort of realistic. It wasn't, you know, we're going to be pissed off if we don't win the Oscar and get into 600 screens. There wasn't anything like that. So they had very, I think, pragmatic expectations for each of these windows. And the thing that, I think one of the secrets of film distribution, whether you're a distributor or whether you're cobbling it together yourselves, is that it is hyper-specialized, and that different types of movies will be maximized and best served by different types of release patterns. And, you know, shocker, traditional theatrical distribution is often not the best one, and in fact is, you know, sort of on a downward trajectory from the sort of peak indie doc cinema of the mid-2000s. It's getting harder and harder. I think Netflix has an incalculably big, you know, impact on that. I think it's, you know, in many positive ways, you know, conditioned people to watch movies in a certain way, especially documentaries. But I think one of the things about Unrest, you know, there was a big objective for them to get, you know, not only some business out of this, but to bring a spotlight on the awareness of ME. And there's a very mutually dependent relationship between traditional theatrical distribution and publicity. You can't get theatrical if you don't have publicity, and you can't get publicity if you don't have theatrical. So, you know, if you are a sort of, you know, poppy, you know, if you're a documentary about pinball machines, you know, vintage pinball machines, I'm making this up, you know, you'd be...
I want to see that movie.
Yeah, I know, right? It does sound cool. It's actually playing here at Doc NYC. No, you know, you should not even think about theatrical. Yeah. Just put your movie on iTunes and spend $20,000 marketing it on Facebook if you have those resources, and you'll kick ass. But that's not something that the team could do in this case.
And for us, you know, over the course of the years, I joined the project in 2014, I think. We, you know, lots of people said, just don't go anywhere near theatrical, don't do it. And it was extremely important to us to do it, but to do it in a realistic way, as you said, because there's a very particular experience that people have when they watch this film together. And particularly if they watch this film and there's a Q&A with Jen at the end. We wanted people to have the experience of communal viewing and then discussion. And we wanted people who may have been surprised by the content of the film to realize the impact that it had on others. So that theatrical moment was incredibly important for us. And in addition, we had this audience of homebound and disabled and unwell people who are totally excluded from going to the cinema in traditional ways. So we've managed to do virtual screenings at the same time as some of our theatrical dates. We've had to work carefully on the windowing, and Alysa's worked incredibly hard on that, to make sure that there are certain screenings where if you're in the cinema, there can be somebody at home watching the film at the same time and then discussing the film in a chat room with all the other people watching the film virtually. And that was extremely important. And we couldn't have done that if we'd handed over all the rights to a company, and we couldn't have done that if we'd done traditional theatrical. And that was completely essential.
What was the technology your company used for that, and was that transactional virtually as well?
Yeah, so that's transactional, and we ended up going with a company called OV that's through ITVS. ITVS runs Independent Lens, and they're our broadcast partner in the US, and they have this platform called OV that does live screening events online, which they do actually you should check it out on Independent Lens. They often do OV screenings for the films that are on Independent Lens, where you can watch the film and have filmmaker chat rooms afterwards. And so we worked with them, and Yeah, and then we were able to determine which dates, and we did them regionally. So if we're here in New York, when we were here in New York and opened at IFC Center theatrically, that very night we had limited virtual tickets that we were selling, so that people could join and watch the film virtually and be in a chat room afterwards. And we told people in New York, like, hey, there are all these people watching at the same time as you who are like the people in the film who can't get out of their houses, and hey, you can also tweet about it. And if you hashtag Time for Unrest, they'll know how much you are moved by their stories and how much you want to be an ally. So it was really powerful for both the people who, were coming out to the theaters and the people who couldn't come out to the theaters. And then we were able to use through the virtual screenings, the people who were moved online could tell their friends that it's actually playing in New York this whole week. So it was really symbiotic between outreach, traditional distribution or commercial distribution, and community, outreach and marketing. So I think we were creatively looking for ways to blur those lines and to slay the false binaries that I think persist in doc world.
And just very briefly, when we were talking about numbers earlier and percentages and how these things divide up, we have a long-running impact campaign that costs money, and so I think sometimes people feel shy about wanting their film to do well financially. They think, well, I've made something good and powerful and important, and it doesn't matter about the money. And it does, because it enables you to do more of the work that you're intending to do, and that's been a really important part of the sort of cycle of this film, that it also really helps, I think, when you're negotiating. We're not negotiating because we're greedy, we're not negotiating because we just want cash. We're negotiating because we need to be able to extend this important work and finance it for a long period of time.
And we worked also in partnership, like speaking to that with our funders, people who supported the film early on, impact partners, Ruth Ann Harnish at the Harnish Foundation, Ian Darling in Australia. These people are creative investors, truly, and Sundance has recognized that with their Catalyst program, which we did, and where it brings together filmmakers and creative investors. But I mean, Ian Darling in Australia really has helped spearhead our impact campaign there. He's super knowledgeable about outreach and has worked with many documentaries. So we tapped into their expertise. So you're not just asking people to write checks, but you're like, what are your ideas? What have you done on other films? These people have been on more films than we have. And with Ruth Ann Harnish, for example, she had a really brilliant idea to offer, use some of the money for impact to offer theatrical tickets to medical practitioners. And I thought that was really enlightened, right? Where we're saying it's not just about the dollars, it's about reaching these people who can then become satellites to get the word out in the medical community. So during our theatrical in New York, and I think, did we do that in the UK too? Yeah. In the UK, in San Francisco, we were able to say any medical practitioners, we can offer you tickets. And it was really successful, not just in terms of turnout, but also in terms of being able to get the word out about the film.
Can you talk a little bit about how you identify an audience? Like the first thing you guys said a minute ago was, we want the widest audience possible, which is always like, it's scary because it's like, okay, the kind of movies that Chris watches might not be the same kind of movies that I watch. And so you have to really drill down on how to find them and what they're into. Can you guys talk about building that? I remember like back at Chicken and Egg, we talked a lot about slicing out what are the 2 or 3 things that were really important to the film, and then how to attach an audience to those internal narratives. Yeah,
and I think that the way that I see the audience is sort of expanding in circles from the core audience outwards. So we have that group of people who are already affected by this issue, who are passionate about it, who are desperate to see the film, and they're at the centre of that circle. And then we have, beyond that, particularly because this is an issue connected to women's health, to women not being believed, there's that next circle of people with related conditions, illnesses, experience in the healthcare sector, and women sort of as part of that group. And then the next level out is more broad and more public. But it's, as you said, as we kind of worked on at Chicken and Egg all those years ago, it's all connected to key parts of the story. And so that also fed into our social media messaging and the marketing that we did. So the team created spots, advertising spots that were specifically targeted to what if you're a carer? What if you're someone whose partner or family member has an illness? And then there was a clip relevant to that. There was a clip about women's health specifically.
Is it on Facebook or
Yes.
social
Everywhere.
media? Social
Yeah.
We did related
Facebook,
diseases,
Instagram.
so
Yeah, all of the social media places that young people use.
And
well,
you wanna talk about
it's
the
actually
vision?
it's everybody. I mean,
I just like
yeah.
paper. I'm a Luddite.
It's the but I think for the filmmakers in the audience, the biggest takeaway is just especially if you're producing your own feature for distribution, or even if you're in development on a project, just the profound power, I think especially of Facebook, that it's how movies are being marketed now, to an incredibly specific degree. And there's a double-edged sword in there, of course, because I think it, on some level you can argue that it contributes to sort of the hyper partisanship and balkanization of interests. But if you don't know how to use these tools, go up and hire an intern from, I don't know, SVA or FIT or something, who knows how to do it, and spend $1,000, and you will have a very, very good sense of who your audience is, and you will say that wow, this 30-second spot that we did was incredibly over-indexing among this sector of people, and then this sector that we thought was going to be good didn't perform as well. And the way Facebook works is that the ads become cheaper the more specific they are, and so you can just double down and double down and try to just.
So you guys
drill it in.
believe in Facebook ads? I feel like that's a big question too.
Well, it's how
like,
Trump
should I
won
do
the
them or not?
election,
Well, of course,
but-
yeah, I mean,
It's
Hey, if
worryingly
Trump can do
effective.
it, then a doc filmmaker can do it, right?
I think if you can
yeah.
afford it, it's one of the most effective ways that you can market your movie.
And I think, obviously, interns are important, but we had we worked with Matt Dalman from Third Impression, who did an extraordinary job of tracking all the data as it happened. Jen is an extraordinary director, but she's also an extraordinary manager of and
Statistician.
Yeah, she has this incredible academic background, so she was deeply involved in every moment of that, which is an extension of engaging with her audience. But she led that process in an incredibly strategic, thoughtful, detail-oriented way. She was on it constantly for months and continues to be.
And what's the name of that other person, the company?
Matt Dalman at Third Impression.
And what do they do?
So Matt Dalman, he's a guy. He's based here in New York. He's got a small startup consulting shop called Third Impression. I think it's the number 3 RD Impression. We worked with him on a film that we released a couple of years ago, or about a year ago, called First Girl I Loved, which is a narrative feature that premiered at Sundance at the 2016 Film Festival. Didn't get the offers they were hoping for. We worked with them on a creative release. They didn't do any theatrical, but we focused specifically on iTunes. It's sort of like the logline is almost cliche Sundance. It's like, 2 young women in high school fall in love, and what we did was we targeted, women ages, 18 to 34 who, identified as lesbian or bisexual, and concentrated exclusively on that demographic, and spent about $30,000 on social media, about 80% of which was on Facebook, and developed an incredibly rich connection with the community. And you can test tools like this. It's I want to target lesbian women ages 18 to 34 who also like The Fault in Our Stars, and
Who live in San Diego.
Who live in San Diego, and it's just crazy how intense this is getting with some of the bigger studios that have money to basically alter the creative in real time. So
Can you talk about the return on First Girl I Love? Is that public?
Yeah. So
Because you said how much you spent.
Yeah, the team made over $100,000 from transactional digital alone. We actually worked with the producers on a case study that we published on Sundance.org, our website. So if you just Google First Girl I Love Sundance case study, you can find it. We published it a couple months ago, and it offered a very, very rich detail about how the team used Facebook to market the movie, and gave some very transparent takeaways about how the film did financially. And we're going to be doing the same thing with Columbus and Unrest and future films that we're doing with our fellowship, which is a really important part. But you know, this is very, very scientific stuff. You know, there's a company, A24, that's like the genius, you know, film distribution company, and they work with a company called Operum that we've developed a relationship at Sundance. And Operum is sort of a benevolent equivalent to Cambridge Analytica. And basically, these are data harvesters that use Facebook to develop algorithms and predictive performance metrics that you test ads in real time. So I'm going to test 2 different 30-second spots, one of which features, you know, Jen at the beginning, and one of which features Ricky Gervais at the beginning or something, and the one featuring Jen, you know, was outscoring 10-1 the ad feature. You know, you're basically testing audiences, and so you take away that Ricky Gervais, and then you retest another piece of creative, so you're optimizing this like funnel about what ad speaks best to your audience. Again, this is really scary stuff, but it is scary how well it works. And I think what we're trying to do at Sundance with these guys, and what we are doing with Columbus, is to try to use this technology in, you know, in ways that can, you know, appeal to, you know, just make sure that these movies get seen. Because, you know, the fact of the matter is that, you know, the average American is spending, I think, like, I don't know, 2 hours a day on Facebook, and it's taking attention from other ways that marketing normally happens, and it's so much cheaper and so much more effective than other types of media that's where everything's going. So if you're not reaching them, if you're not engaging with them, if your ad is not showing up on somebody's feed, your movie shows a risk of not getting seen. And that's against our mission at Sundance. So hey, let's fight the good fight with it.
Yeah. We have to go to questions, but do you have...
I was just going to say briefly that Alysa and I were talking about this yesterday when we've been working on the film's budgets, and you know, whenever I'm working on any film's budget, I want to include a chunk of money for distribution, marketing, and outreach. And generally, you'll go to organisations who'll go, no, that's not part of it. You have to take it out, and it is part of it. You know, you can't. People can't see films unless you show them where they are and you do the work to engage with them.
You're putting yourself at a disadvantage if you get to a festival and don't have anything left for afterwards. Yeah. So I would encourage everyone to do that, and myself included, to do that in the future.
And I think more and more funders are on that same page, understanding that that chunk of money needs to be in the budget. Like, it's slowly getting more on that page.
I hope so. We've had to argue for it.
Yeah.
People are, no, that's for later, and it is not. It has to be something that happens early on.
Yeah, there's a lot of funder education that we have to do ourselves. I think it's also, just to put it out there, filmmakers, always put your salary in your budget. Stop doing that. Women especially, put your salary in your budget. Okay, so we're gonna do some questions. And you guys, I hope that you'll engage and ask some questions. The biggest thing, like just from the Facebook thing we were just saying, is it's so scary. I'm a super not Facebook person either. And it's like, oh, this is too much. I'll just do the thing that I learned 10 years ago. But you do really, all the filmmakers, producers, directors do have to dig in yourselves.
Get hip to it.
And really get hip to it and put your hands, you know, and find those partners and thinking about that kind of thing. You can't really let that pass us by anymore. So I think there's one in the back there. Yeah? You just shout it out. We'll repeat it.
The difference, what does one have to choose, or did we choose between community screenings and theatrical, and sort of what is the distinction between the two? So a theatrical screening takes place at a movie theater, and there's usually a box office split, and sometimes the theater does a little bit of marketing with you where they have it on their brochure or ads, etc., and tickets are sold. A community screening is organized in a community venue that might be a non-traditional theater. Sometimes it could be a rented theater, but sometimes it could be a high school auditorium or a senior center, and those screenings are usually license fees for the filmmakers, you know, a modest license fee. Sometimes the fee is waived, and those are organized by local community members. You know, my mom could call up and try to do a community screening of Unrest in her hometown of Tucson, Arizona, and she would find a venue, and she would maybe partner with an organization, university or something like that, and have it there, or a professor at a university could do that. So does that help? And we did not choose between them. We did both.
But I think it's also, you know, the team didn't, you know, wasn't going to be pissed if they didn't win the Oscar. Yeah. But, you know, you want to give it the college try. And based on the scale of the film and the P&A that was being allocated, it made sense to do that, which means that, you know, in order to do that, I'm a little light on the rules. But, you know, it's like a week-long run in New York, a week-long run in L.A., reviews in the major newspapers in those markets. So, you know, that takes care of that. Again, that's that codependent relationship between theatrical and publicity that, you know, that I mentioned earlier. But it was also, you know, I think maybe 10 major markets was the theatrical of Unrest about, you know. So San Francisco, there's a large and educated doc cineaste community up there, medical professional community. It's important to play theatrically in the San Francisco market. Same with, I think, Chicago.
We did LA, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, and then we did one-offs. So we did like a screening in Princeton where Jen's husband is a professor. We did one in Tucson, which is my hometown. It has a great art house cinema. We did, you know, we did an Atlanta screening that was a one-night only event. DC, we did a one-night only event. Baltimore picked it up, I think, after the New York theatrical. So it expanded a little bit, yeah.
And also the theatrical is important to encourage people to do those community screenings. People recognise films that have been in the cinema. It's really important throughout this process to remember that whatever you want to do with a film from an impact perspective, it needs to be recognised as a film, as a piece of art, as a piece of cinema. And so that's part of encouraging people to do the next phase of community screenings themselves.
And community screenings can be much bigger. Like for my film Unfinished Spaces, we did a huge screening in New York City at Cooper Union in the Great Hall, you know, and it got a little bit of press, and it was full house. So you can make it a big special showcase event when you want to.
Can you guys just say percentage, if you feel comfortable, what your marketing budget was of your greater budget?
I don't know how good are we at math in our head.
So very bad.
25?
Our actual, what it ended up being for our whole
P&A?
P&A?
What it ended up being, yeah.
To be honest, because we're still in the process of some of those elements, that's the kind of stuff that will be in our case study, but we're all still kind of collecting that data right now.
Right. More than 50%? No, probably not.
No, not more than 50% of our production budget.
Okay, but
No.
the point is, you need it.
You need it. I would say, I mean, maybe one could say that on my future films, I'll try to allocate at least 10%, and hopefully more on any film, of the 10% at least of the production budget to hold on to for after the festival.
We'll go right in the front, yeah.
I don't know where to start. Wonderful project, wonderful film. I haven't seen the film, but I love the trailer. I met Jen also. I have a question. I'm a filmmaker. I do everything myself. So she is the director. She's in it. How does this whole thing start? Like, you're the producer. So did you find the project and hired her? Or did she find you? How did she find you? How
Good questions.
Yeah.
Wonderful marriage.
So Jen was doing it all by herself with no, that's not fair actually. She initially reached out to an incredible creative advisor and executive producer, Debbie Hoffman, who is an Oscar-winning editor, an extraordinary filmmaker, and they were the first people on board with the project. Once Jen raised money on Kickstarter by herself, essentially, although she did employ a team to help her, she invested some money in that process. She started reaching out to filmmakers around the world. So she got in touch with me because she was looking for a producer in the UK, and lots of different film festivals all recommended that she come and talk to me because we had subject interests in common, and I'd produced films.
Wonderful films.
Thank you. On kind of related subjects about the body before. So she and I started working together in that way. She found me. This is always, Jen is a director, writer. She did some of the editing. She's one of the producers. There's 4 producers on the project altogether, including Alysa and I. And so it's always been her project, her vision, and she did the same thing with Trish Gillespie. Trish is an extraordinarily talented filmmaker based in New York City. She reached out to her at around the same time that she reached out to me, and we started working together in quite an organic way. We didn't actually meet in person for the first 10 months that we worked together because she was bedbound. So we did everything remotely. But she really built her team, and the project has been hers from the very beginning.
Yeah. I wanted to ask about windowing. If your film is already on SVOD, do you have any tips for launching it on TVOD without the SVOD totally murdering your TVOD?
The question is, if the film's already on SVOD, can it go on TVOD?
And for those that don't know, SVOD means subscription VOD, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon. TVOD is transactional VOD, which is something like iTunes. The short answer is yes, of course. I think, there's a couple of ways to do it. I personally, and probably like many of you, I have an Apple TV, which gives me Netflix and Hulu and iTunes. My first instinct is probably to go to Netflix first and to see if it's available there. It's simple human economic psychology, but ways to induce sales, are to create assets that are sort of auxiliary content to the film itself, bonus features. For many movies, that's a way to create sort of, hey, I'm giving you a reason to spend money to own this film. On iTunes, at least, you get access to bonus features if you purchase the movie. So it's a way to get sales that way. You need iTunes approval to make a film available for 99-cent rental, but those are often promotions that films do when they're on a subscription VOD platform. Another thing to test out is Amazon Video Direct has an upload system where you can make it available for purchase, rental, or to make it available for streaming on Amazon Prime. And you have a lot of flexibility on that platform to set your own price. Taking a look at Vimeo, which offers bundling, if you have multiple assets beyond the film itself and you own the rights, if there's another film, a related film, you could bundle and package those things together. It's just to try to, what is unique about this purchase that you're going to give somebody a reason to buy it rather than just stream it.
It could even be a philanthropic motivation if you have a social issue topic documentary and you're very clear on your website with purchase in this way and the proceeds go toward this impact outcome.
Hi. Did you involve your core audience in the distribution process as advocates? People who are by themselves affected by the disease, how could you involve them in distribution?
They are involved to a large extent. People have been so eager to help, and
This is the core audience. The question was, how do you involve your core audience in distribution?
Yeah, so the people
bedridden.
with ME, their caregivers, that core audience, how have they been involved in the distribution? And it's they've been integral to the process. So keeping them informed has been key. We started a private Facebook group for people who want to host community screenings who are in the community, giving them educational materials, giving them outreach materials, giving them assets like the social media tile that they can share with their communities. And even there's more than
there's kind of so much, but I think it's also been incredibly important that Jen and the team have communicated with the audience from the beginning. This is what we want to do. This is why we want to do it. I think there are times when it's very frustrating for the audience to not have the film in every format immediately in the way that they'd like it. And so it's been an act of faith. They have tremendous faith in Jen. She has an extraordinary relationship. It's a very unusual scenario that Jen created in the first place. And so that communication, explaining how the stages work, explaining why they're important to amplify the message of the film, to make sure that it isn't just a film that does work within its own community, but that it goes more widely into the public. That communication process has been essential. But
We did online chats with them where we did online Blue Jeans meetings. Blue Jeans is software that allows, numerous people to join a meeting online.
it's like Skype, but it works.
Yeah, and then people have done appearances. So I did an appearance at the Tucson screening, which is my hometown, and the woman who was on the Q&A with me is a local patient who's part of the advocacy work that Jen's been doing with her organization, Emmy Action. So we've involved them at eventized theatrical screenings and community screenings and whatnot.
And the number of cinemas who contacted us and said, so many people have asked us if we can program this film. We'd like to program this film, please. The audience has been really active, engaged, and independent. Jen created an organisation called Emmy Action, which is an advocacy organisation that gives people resources to do the advocacy work themselves. So it's been a very independent process. We provide the tools and then people can run with it, and that's been really exciting.
I just realized we haven't said anything about the VR project.
We also have a virtual reality project.
Very busy, ladies.
Yeah, well, it's been wonderful because I thought of it because I said eventizing the theatrical, which means creating, and we've talked about this a little bit, but creating a theatrical event that people want to go to because you can meet the director, you can meet the subject of the film. One of the other ways that we did that was, and this wasn't the reason that this was created, but this was one way that we used the VR project, was to have it in the lobby or in another area of the theater, so that before or after a screening, people can do this virtual reality project that is a computer-generated, incredibly artful piece that we could have a whole other panel about.
Yeah, I mean, VR is sort of its own thing. It's very expensive. You need to make sure that it fits the narrative of the film, etc.
But that model could be used with it doesn't have to be a VR project, but some kind of related bonus content.
Yeah, and theatrical bookers were really excited about it. They saw it purely as a marketing exercise, and that isn't why it was created, but essentially people get to lie on a bed in the lobby of a cinema and have this 15-minute incredibly intense VR experience, and cinemas were really excited about how people could engage with that, and it was another level of engaging with the public. Anybody who came to see Blade Runner could also do Unrest VR, whether they knew about the film or saw the film, and that was really important.
That's really smart. I mean, that's just like cross-promotion. Strangers that aren't even going to see your movie can also engage with it in a different way.
And it's 15 minutes, not 97.
Yeah. Yes?
Hi, I just want to thank you. It's really insightful. And I'm just wondering, can you share about how you first identify your core territory? As you mentioned about the target US, UK, Australia, is it like data-driven or something?
No, for us that was very much about...
How do you find your core territory?
Sorry, yeah. Our core territories were the ones included in the film. So Jen engages with and films with subjects in the US, the UK and Denmark, and there's also a tremendously big community in Australia. So we identify those territories because they're the places where really important and complicated things are happening around the disease. It's where our subjects are. So that's how
it would hit home for that community. They're saying, oh, that person lives 20 minutes from where I live. That makes sense as something that's interesting to me.
Absolutely, and from a press point of view, that was also incredibly important. I mean, we've talked very little about it, but our press strategy was extremely important in this whole process. And we were lucky to work with 4 press PR companies altogether in these different territories, doing extraordinary, detailed, generous work with this complicated narrative. And it was very important that those people and those stories in those countries could speak to those press opportunities in those places.
We have time for one more question, but I kind of wonder if we should hear more about this press strategy. Raise your hand if you want to hear about the press strategy. Okay, let's do that.
I mean, it's a really big
They'll be here after.
topic, but it's part of what Chris was saying before. Why would you, with a film about something so specific, with an approach from Jen so detailed and so nuanced and so sensitive, why would you hand over the press and PR to some random people to do and say what they came up with? We worked with PR in the UK, in New York, San Francisco, and LA. We had incredibly detailed press releases. We responded in incredibly detailed ways to all of the press opportunities that came our way. We identified who we wanted to make targets for various different reasons, whether advocacy reasons, kind of cinema-related reasons. We also identified the people that we didn't want to engage with, because in territories like the UK, it's a tremendously controversial disease, and there's been some repetitive and extremely unhelpful press coverage of this illness. So we wanted to make sure that we did something new, and touch wood, it feels like we may have done. It feels like it's been incredibly effective at creating some new messaging around this illness that's had this very tired and depressing and frankly damaging messaging for 25 years. But we had to work daily with our amazing press teams to manage all
That's
those
also
opportunities.
just a fee. You know, they have a fee.
Yeah, they have a
or-
retainer.
Yeah, the retainer you
Yeah.
pay them.
And you don't know what you're going to get. So that's,
Yeah.
that can be a difficult position as a producer where you're paying somebody. You want to have a strong understanding of what they're going to do and how they're going to do it, and also be sensitive to the obstacles that they face. I mean, we had our theatrical release at the same time that all the hurricanes hit, and that makes it harder. Realistically speaking,
Yeah.
for those publicists to get the coverage they want for what's essentially like a lifestyle story or a film world story.
I think it's important just to say also to think about yourselves as an asset for your film getting press too. I mean, it helps that Jen is a really fancy person outside of this film and has done a lot of great things with her work. She's incredibly eloquent. She's gorgeous. She's super smart. She did a TED Talk, I think, right after or during where you guys were editing. So thinking about where you can place your subjects and where you can place your director too is a good opportunity for thinking about press opportunities. So,
and again, you have to build that into your budget. Jen just did an extraordinarily demanding tour with the US theatrical and the UK theatrical with loads and loads of press opportunities, loads of interviews, loads of TV, loads of radio. We had to fund that, and she had to manage, her time for that and her energy for that too.
So you guys should look at March for the case study to come out, the Sundance Creative Distribution Initiative, so that you can hear and learn about how all these things are saying panned out and how, all the nitty-gritty details around that. Because we'd love to know if all that press exposure, what did that lead to in terms of financials, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah?
Yeah. And if you want to watch the film, it is currently on iTunes and Google Play and Vudu.
And if you want to apply for our fellowship,
Yeah.
go to our website and go to the creative distribution section, and you can apply.
When is it open right now?
Yeah,
What's
it's a
the
rolling
deadline? Oh, it's
rolling
rolling.
application
Rolling
between now
application.
and July. So if you have a completed film that premiered at a U.S. festival within the last year and own your rights, apply.
Do you know how many you're going to take this year? 2 again or more?
4,
Four.
maybe 3.
Okay.
It was too easy for them this
Too
year,
easy.
2
Yeah.
films.
Thank you guys so much for being here.